Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod to do our season recap of the non-MSU Big Ten. We'll go from the bottom up. So today is Washington to Northwestern. Before we start, a quick word of thanks to Michael Yoakum, who became a monthly supporter of the show just through PayPal. We appreciate you, Michael, and all those who support the content we give you throughout the off-season and in the in-season too. So especially patron supporters at the Mateen Cleaves level: Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosnick, Chad Hickey, Mike Huntoon, and Scott Driscoll. Draymond Green supporters: Adam Paul Walzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Doug Robinson, Dan O'Dranak, all the Scott Scowl supporters on Patreon, as well as Rich Wagenheim, Kent Kremet, Roger Bronsick, Al, Michael Emmerich, and Joe and BT on Substack. If you want to support the show, please head on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support to get the links. All right, Rod, so let's get into it. We're going to talk about the rest of the Big Ten, how they did, sort of a general summary, I guess you'd say, including, I guess we'll say, postseason and in season. And we're going to start with the dregs of the Big Ten to begin with, which, when we started, of course, we didn't know how anyone was going to finish. We had our ideas of where they would be. The team we're going to start with first is Washington. Pretty much ended kind of the way we thought. Their season went about the way expected. So overall, they were 13-18 for the year, 4-16 in the Big Ten. They were in last place by 2 games. Their Ken Palm ranking matched their, I guess what you'd say, their record. They're 104th. Notable players like Great Osborne, Tyler Harrison. That might be an interesting place to start. I mean, so his first year coach for Danny Sprinkle, too, who had just joined the Big Ten, came from Utah State, I think. They spent a lot of money on Great Osborne, who was, I don't even know if it was $1 million. It seemed like people were kind of throwing that number around.
No, it was 2 million.
2 million.
Yeah,
So maybe they won that press conference, but that's about all they won.
yeah. There you go. And he put up some numbers, but was he a difference maker? No. Um, yeah, it did go pretty much the way we figured. We had them, I think we had them 17th in the preseason,
Yeah.
only ahead of Minnesota, and they finished 18th. As you said, by 2 games, which in this league, that's a lot. Here's another number. So they're 4-16 in the league, right? 11 of those 16 losses came by double digits.
Yeah.
So they were not competitive. I mean, it's the bottom line. They were also the only Big Ten team to finish outside the top 100 in Ken Palm overall. That's another sign. And generally speaking, if you're a Big Ten team that doesn't finish inside the top 100, you're pretty bad.
Yeah.
And they just were. When you saw them play, I mean, Michigan State only faced them once, and it was early in the season at Breslin. It was January 9th. MSU beat them by 34, and it was every bit that wide a gap. I
Yeah.
mean, the teams were not even close. So, uh, yeah, it was a rough introduction to big time basketball for Danny Sprinkle. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Just real quickly, some of the numbers. Also bore the $2 million man, 14.8 points a game, 8 rebounds per game, also 3.4 assists, and he was a very good passer for a big man.
Right.
But he struggled shooting the ball, only 47% overall, which for a big is not great.
Yeah.
24.5% from three, 62% at the line. So his efficiency was just not good. And I think it's one thing to spend that money and, then you look at the individual production, but I think your hope is that a guy like that will carry the rest of the team and elevate everybody else. That clearly did not happen. Now, this was not, I do have to say, the amount of money was obviously attention getting, but Osobor had been with Danny Sprinkle his whole college career, two
Right.
previous stops, right? And so it made sense from that perspective. It just didn't really work out. Tyler Harris was an interesting player. He was I believe, a transfer from Portland, if I remember correctly. Um, and he had, yeah, from Portland, and he had an interesting year. In some ways better than Osobor, 11.8 points per game, but a much more efficient shooter. He shot 49% overall, rounded up to 50% from three, if you can
Yeah.
believe that,
Wow.
and 69% at the line. He grabbed 5 rebounds per game. So Tyler Harris had himself a very good sophomore season. We're not going to bother. It's just too much to track right now where these guys are ending up.
Oh,
Tyler
yeah.
Harris is not going to be at Washington next year.
Right.
Osibor is out of eligibility, I believe. So their runs at that school are done. But Harris was the best of a bad lot for that team. And it was a year that they did have a home court win over Maryland, which was a shocker even at the time. And it becomes even more shocking when you look back retrospectively and see where the two teams ended up that it ever happened. Other than that, their wins were against other similar, Penn State, Minnesota. They're against other teams that were kind of toward their end of the league. And as I say, they got hammered a lot. 11
Yeah.
out of 16 losses by double digits. So rough first year for Danny Sprinkle. We'll see if a year like that helps him get this thing on track going forward. But I think it's going to be a tough ride.
Did they have any road wins, or were they all home?
That's a good question. So
They're only four to look
we will
up.
see. They definitely beat Maryland at home. Their big
Yep.
win came at home for sure. Um, yes, they had two of their four were actually on the road at
Oh,
Minnesota
okay.
and at Penn State. A
Oh,
three
that's right.
point win and a 2 point win. They also beat Northwestern by 5 at home.
Hmm.
But other than that, yeah. So 2-8 home, 2-8 away.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there at Washington because certainly we talked about it before when Danny Sprinkle's joining, and we just with the addition of Washington, not with a great basketball tradition, although they've had occasionally teams that are okay or pretty good. Generally not a great support you'd expect there, and we'll see going forward how it is for Danny Sprinkle. It's hard to know with one
It didn't
year.
look good. The
It didn't
games
look
I
good,
the games I saw a lot of opposing fans in the stands in Seattle. You know,
which is saying
it's
something because it's not
it's
easy to get up
not
to
quite
Seattle
well,
with transplants.
it's not quite the same pull when you're going to Eugene and Seattle as it is for USC and UCLA, but they're not that far apart, and it's very
Well,
viable to do it as a trip, as a fan. And it looked to me like there was some of that this season. Again, not nearly as much as in with the LA schools, but it did look
yeah.
that way.
I mean, I feel like I agree. It's much less likely you're going to make a West Coast, Pacific Northwest trip. However, there's probably just enough I mean, it doesn't take that many extra fans from those schools to show up to a game to have a decent showing
To an
when you're
empty
out.
arena,
Right.
otherwise,
I mean,
yes. Yeah.
it's not like there were 50,000 Michigan State fans at the USC game. I mean, there were probably what, like seven or something like that.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
somewhere in
remember,
that neighborhood. Yeah.
but that seemed like it was a lot for that
Yep.
situation. So I don't know. I guess it is too early, I think, to get any sort of read on how good Danny Sprinkle is going to be,
No,
and because
can't tell
there's so
yet.
much that it's beyond just coaching, right? It's the other management of all the other stuff and building programs,
That's what'll
which we
deter.
saw the way
Yeah.
Ben Johnson just fell apart just because of that aspect, and then donor relations maybe or something else.
In some cases, you can say, well, they need they need to do a lot of different things. In Washington's case, meaning is the coach getting the most out of his roster, all that kind of stuff. In Washington's case, it was very obvious they just didn't have enough talent.
Yeah,
They were outclassed regularly.
yeah.
And at that point, it's a very basic question. It's like, you got to get more guys that can play.
All right, before we talk about our next team, the Penn State Nittany Lions, just reminders just like these teams want to wash away their season and just memories of it. Make sure if you need your windows cleaned, if you're in the west side of the state of Michigan, contact the Swedish Squad of Grand Rapids. They can also wash your house, do power washing to take care of all the grime that's on the side of the house that you've been building up over the years since you've been neglecting it. Sometimes it's so nice that you don't even have to paint your house. You might think you need a paint job, and it turns out you just need to wash it off. So contact the Squeegee Squad. They will get up on the ladders. They'll take care of all that for you. And as a listener to the show, you get 10% off. Or sorry, 15% off. Even better than 10. 15% off if you mention Final Four when you get the estimate. You can find ways to reach out to them at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. There you can find the necessary link to get a hold of them. And again, it is a large region around the Grand Rapids area. So get a hold of them today. You'll be glad you did. All right, so we'll talk about the Nittany Lions, a team that we thought generally it's after the first year for Mike Rhodes, it looked like it was promising. And then this year was really anything but. Their overall record 16-15, Big Ten record 6-14. So I mean they were 10-1 going into the Big Ten with the non-conference. I don't remember their schedule. It's usually not super hard, but Ken Palm ranking 58, not bad, but in the 17th spot, they obviously missed the Big Ten tournament, despite having Ace Baldwin, Yannick Niederhauser, both had nice seasons. A disappointing season for the Nittany Lions, and for again, you wonder if with the institution without the support that the basketball program gets at a place like Penn State,
Well,
it's going
I'm
to be
not
hard to sort of get things going, I think, here.
I'm not quite ready to declare the Mike Rhodes era a failure by any means. I do
Hmm.
think he's in a situation where he's gonna be rebuilding again next year, and we'll see what that looks like in terms of his talent. This was just a very disappointing season, and you mentioned the great start in the non-conference. Where it all really fell apart, though, was between January 5th and February 15th, they went 1-11.
That's rough.
And that was it. That was
Yeah.
ball game. Like that killed them. They closed winning 3 of their last 5. But that 1-11 stretch, and there were a lot of competitive losses in
Yeah.
there. They lost Michigan State, only beat
That
them
was
by
not a, yeah, that was
5.
a competitive game. Yeah.
Yeah. They lost to Oregon by a point. They lost to Indiana by 6. They lost to Iowa by 1. They lost to Michigan by 4. They lost to Minnesota by 8. And they lost to Washington by 2. That's a lot of games that they were in.
Yeah.
That if you even turn half of those the other way, you're in a different position down the stretch. And it just didn't work for them. But it's an interesting thing. Like when you watch them, or at least when I watched them, I felt like they generally looked like a pretty good team. They had some nice pieces. You mentioned 2 guys. Baldwin, the point guard, I actually didn't think was as good maybe as he was the year before. He was
Yeah, I
Big
agree.
Ten Defensive Player of the Year. Whether you think he actually deserved it or not is another question. But he was certainly a good defensive player, and he was a key guy for them offensively. And then uh, Yannick Conan Niederheiser came out of nowhere. This is a guy who was a part-time player at Northern Illinois, a
Yeah.
rotation guy, and he steps in and I've got his stats, becomes just a presence for Penn State. 12.9 points, 6.3 boards, 2.3 blocks per game, 61% from the floor, and a lot of dunks, I can tell you that,
Yeah.
and 66% at the line. But he was a factor. And again, just kind of came out of nowhere. Um, and they had other guys. They had veteran Zach Hicks, Nick Kern, Puff Johnson. They had a bunch of guys. Dunn had some good games. DeLeon, the transfer from Tennessee. They had a nice rotation. Their starting lineup was solid. That Conan Niederheiser gave them a legit big man, and then they had actually pretty good positional size at the perimeter spots. Had a proven point guard, Ace Baldwin. It should have added up to more. And the
Yeah.
fact that they were top 60 in Ken Palm and 6-14 in the league, those don't quite add up. You would have expected them to be a little more competitive in the Big Ten than they were. And so I think talent wise, I don't think they were very far away from being at least a bubble team. But the results just did not cut in that direction.
Yeah, I think Niederhauser is a great example. There's a lot of consternation, a lot of gnashing of teeth for who Michigan State gets as their final transfer, this, that, or the other. And this is much like Great Osibor, sort of sold won the press conference going to Washington. This is the
Mm-hmm.
opposite. I don't think anybody was thinking anything of this guy from Northern
Nope.
Illinois, Niederhauser, and he was. I'm not gonna say dominant, but he was very important. Like you said, he's very important, very stat stuffer. He was really good player. You just don't know. And I think this is the problem that I think whether it's, you move to a different system, maybe you play differently, maybe you've developed. Uh, we see this in all kinds of sports, right? We see it like in baseball. A player changes a team and suddenly he's, batting an extra, instead of 250, 300 batter or
Look at the
vice versa.
look at the Tigers this year. Javi Baez has given them what 3 straight years of just miserable play. He's hitting over 300, playing stellar defense, showing some power lately. It's sports are weird.
Yeah.
They're not always as predictable as you think.
Well, yeah, that's why I was asking my son that the other day. I'm like, do we like Javi Baez now? I can't remember. I can't. It's
He's back to being Mago. Yeah.
he's been now he's yeah, now we like him. Um, Yeah, Penn State is, and you'll see as we go further on for those watching or those listening, the Ken Palm overall of 58 is actually not terrible. That's a team you'd
Not at all.
expect.
That's what I mean.
That is a
That's
team you'd expect in the bubble. And you'll see
that
teams
right.
much lower as we go further up the list here.
That puts you 58. You're probably outside looking in, but it's not, you're in the conversation.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then it's a game here, there that you steal, win somewhere, and then that may give that quad one win you needed or something.
You would think it would have added up to 2 or 3 more wins in the league than it did.
Do you remember where you had them? I mean, I feel like they were probably, you had them probably
I don't.
12th
I had
or
them.
13th.
I had them higher than this.
Yeah.
I don't recall how much higher.
Yeah. So I should have written that down, but that's okay. So Penn State, we'll kind of see, but this is the second year for Mike Rhodes, and he'll, I mean, at least from what we saw in the first year, I think there's reason to believe that, and even this year they did lose a bunch, but they were competitive. They weren't just getting, this is like a huge step up from Washington, right? This is not like the same sort of team.
No, there's much more reason for optimism around this. They play hard. They've got kind of a style that's been established. I still think, that's why I said I'm not ready to bury Mike Rhodes. Yeah. I think year 3, it's important. You got to start showing some real progress, getting toward being a tournament caliber team, but I don't rule that out.
Yeah. Well, those 10 Penn State basketball fans have something to look forward to. All right. So this comes to what I thought was, I mean, it's interesting because there's some surprising teams in the Big Ten and sort of where they ended up finishing. And I think this is one of them for me. Nebraska, I was not convinced and sold on them being really great, but this is a team that had enough pieces. You certainly thought they were going to be pretty competitive bubble team. I mean, whether they make the NCAA tournament or not, there wasn't really much part of me that thought they weren't going to make the Big Ten tournament. And I was very surprised they didn't. I mean, they finished 21-14 overall and then 7-13 in the Big Ten. And those 13, a lot of them came down the stretch where they're just really killers and by sort of tiebreakers ended up missing the Big Ten tournament. And 46 overall. I mean, 46 overall is pretty good. And, they weren't even sniffing the NCAA tournament at the end.
Try on 5 straight losses to end the regular season and 6 of their last 7 for size.
Yeah.
Nebraska did everything you can possibly do to throw away not just a Big Ten tournament bid, but an NCAA tournament bid.
Yes. Because
the losses were ridiculous. They lost the last 5, they lost by 17 at Penn State. Okay, that's not great. They lost by 3 at home to Michigan. They lost by 2 at home to Minnesota. They lost by 2 in double overtime away at Ohio State. And then they lost by 15 at home to Iowa. And even as much as they had done negatively, if they get that win over Iowa, I think they were probably in.
Yeah, well, they certainly in the Big Ten tournament because that was only
right.
That
for
was
sure.
Default.
That's the way Iowa got in, right? So they ended up in part of this huge 7-13 logjam.
Yeah.
In the Big Ten, but they were by far the most disappointing of that group because up until the last 3 weeks, they were pretty much considered a lock to be a tournament team.
Yeah.
And you finished losing 5 in a row, 6 of your last 7. You've done everything you could have to deserve to be out. And it's a shame because it felt like Fred Hoiberg, with the way last season went, and then the start, most 2/3, let's say, or 3/4 even, of this season, had really built momentum. And with the way they collapsed, it just feels like it's gone again. I mean, we'll see what happens next year, but not encouraging for him the way his team closed.
Yeah, and that epic 3-point loss to Michigan, where I think it was the final score 12-9 or something. I can't remember
pretty
exactly.
Much, yeah. One of the worst offensive exhibitions you'll ever see, both ways.
Yeah,
everything like just making shots. Obviously, nobody was doing that. Shot selection, all of it, just all.
Yeah.
Well, they did have a couple of guys that had real individual success. So Bryce Williams actually had a huge season: 20.4 points, 4.1 rebounds, 2.9 assists. And he shot 47% overall, 88% at the line, 37% from 3. He was a really good player. Unfortunately, during that stretch,
I was going to say
closing
he was bad.
run, He wasn't as good, I didn't think, and he wasn't capable. You hope if you've got a guy at that level who's, a potential all league player, that he's good enough to kind of drag everybody else across the finish line. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
And then the other guy worth mentioning was Juwan Gary, 14.6 points, 5.1 rebounds per game, 45% overall, 34% from three, 80% at the line. Really good and really important player for them as a four-man. But just not
Yeah.
enough. Not enough when it counted. They didn't get great year. Connor Esigian was a 10-point a game, almost 11-point a game scorer, and 38% from three. So it kind of bounced back after that bad year at Wisconsin,
Yeah.
but he just wasn't good enough down the stretch. Worcester, their point guard, not good enough down the stretch. It was just
Yeah.
a lot of guys didn't step up.
Yeah, they definitely fell apart. And I felt like, oftentimes if your star player is not playing well, it's not surprising that sort of there's so much the role players are unable to sort of pick up the slack. And I think Bryce Williams was just not really himself the end of the season, and I think that was the larger the reason they lost. I mean, obviously no one else could pick up the slack for him playing poorly down the stretch because he was so good earlier in the year, which is why they were looked like they were good at making.
Yeah.
I mean, they were obviously not a juggernaut, but they were definitely safely in the
Yeah.
field. So Fred Hoiberg again remains an enigma. Sort of like, is this guy? you
Yeah.
know, he's definitely put Nebraska in a from their. If you watch the games, they definitely it's a fun environment. There's definitely a lot of excitement around the basketball program, but just not delivering. It's just one of those things that's
Well, this
I don't know.
represented, I think the close to the season represented a clear step back. There's no doubt about that.
Excuse me. So before we talk about Iowa, let's talk about the Brothers Adjust You Gutters. It is raining out. It's spring. Make sure your gutters are operating properly. And the Brothers Adjust Your Gutters are the ones who can take care of that. They can make sure that all that stuff, all those bad seasons and bad juju from your previous year when you didn't make the Big Ten tournament like Nebraska can just wash right away. So make sure that you're clear of leaves and debris. You can make sure you get those leaf gutters on them. They can do whatever you need to be done. If it's just leaking, need them replaced. The Brothers Adjust Your Gutters can take care of it for you because that's all they do. They just do gutters. They've taken care of my gutters. They've taken care of Rod's gutters. We both had great experiences with them. He had the east side guys. I had the west side guys. Wherever you're in the state of Michigan, on the lower peninsula anyway, they can take care of you. So contact the Brothers Adjust Your Gutters. They'll take care of you and make sure that the water moves properly from your house. You get 10% off as a listener to the show if you just mention Final Four when you get your estimate. And if you want to get an estimate, you can head on over to our support page, of course, at tffinots.com/support. All right, so the Iowa Hawkeyes had an interesting year, I guess I would say, where I was convinced that Fran was on his retirement uh, tour, but clearly he wasn't. He had no intention of retiring, but Iowa had every intention of him not being around at the end of the season, and that seems like it was pretty clear now for a while. And I wonder if he kind of knew that's why he's acting kind of funny. But anyway, they finished 17-16 overall, 7-13 in the Big Ten, and 62 overall in Ken Palm. So not terrible, but okay. But they were definitely not nearly as good as they had been in the past couple of years. They had a number of players who, notable to mention: Josh Dix, Peyton Sanford, Owen Freeman. But the Hawkeyes were, they're fighting for their life. They had a number of games that they could have won to make the Big Ten tournament easily, and then they basically shouldn't have made the Big Ten tournament, and then they got the crazy win against Nebraska where they just blew them out to end the season in Lincoln. So anyway, it was a forgettable season for the Hawkeyes. They now no longer have Fran McCaffrey. That's one of the coaching changes this year. That's the first one we've run into in our review of the Big Ten. He'll be up the Drake coach from Drake. Ben McCollum will be the new coach. So a lot to talk about here, I guess, in some ways. But again, like I said, kind of forgettable season. And just if there's one thing that I noticed most with this is it felt like the Licklider era where there just was zero interest in the basketball team. You
Yeah.
watch those games and there's just nobody in the stands, no excitement, no energy at all. Their best fan experiences when they're on the road.
Yeah, and it was a quick fall, right? Because there was so much enthusiasm not that long ago. If you go back to that 2021 season, the COVID year with Luca Garza,
Yep.
Wieskamp, they had all those guys, and were a really good team. Now they were, their fan base overrated them. They were never really a threat to win the Big Ten or go super deep in the tournament. But there was a lot of talent on that. That was a good team. And even the couple years after that with the Murray twins,
Yep.
they were still pretty competitive. They were tournament level. But just last year and then especially this year, yeah, you watched games from Carver Hawkeye and it was just obvious how little juice there was in the building. And that I think you can only live with that as an athletic department for so long before you feel like, and the other thing would be, you look at Fran McCaffrey, you look at where he is on the curve, his age as a
Yeah.
coach, and you say, okay, what's the likelihood that this is going to get better? And again, a guy who's not, he's not adverse to using the portal, but that's not a program that was going to go out with, huge NIL support behind it and just go buy guys and juice the talent level to a point where they could really compete at the top of the league. That just wasn't going to happen. It,
Yeah.
it sort of becomes a self-reinforcing mechanism, right? Lack of
Yep.
enthusiasm leads to lack of resources, leads to lack of results, which leads to lack of enthusiasm, which leads to lack of resources. You get the point.
Yeah.
And it felt like that's what was going on. I didn't believe, you and I differed, and you were right on this. You thought it was done. I didn't. Because I looked at how he was acting, and I just looked at Iowa's athletic department. I thought, can they really fire this guy? Because let's give him credit. Over the course of his whole tenure, he did a pretty nice job for what Iowa is as a program. He made them
Hmm.
relevant again after a pretty long stretch where they weren't.
Yes.
And I think I just felt like, hey, this guy's going to go out on his own terms, and it doesn't seem like he wants to leave. And he didn't want to leave, but it ended up being forced on him. And I think we're probably both in agreement that the odds are pretty good that we're going to see a better Iowa program moving forward. I think Ben McCollum, very dangerous to come into this league as a head coach, because unlike a lot of guys, he's somebody who's already demonstrated to some degree that he's capable of winning big without huge resources behind him. And that's exactly what I think Iowa needed. They needed a
Yeah.
guy who was a talent identifier and a talent developer who has proven that he can do it without, $10 million NIL budgets behind him. That seems to me to be a note perfect kind of coach for that job as it currently sits. Going back to this year, you could not have asked for a more Fran like ending in terms of profile than this team. They were number 18 in the country in offense, which he's had better groups than that, but it's, still obviously top 20 in the country. You can't say they weren't an efficient offensive team.
Yeah.
Number 167 on defense, one of the worst defensive teams he ever had, and that's saying something. And you put all that together, and that's how you get to 7-13.
Yeah.
So it kind of ended the way it began at Iowa.
Yeah.
Just unbelievably weak defense, good offense, but not great.
Yeah. They were not, they
And
were, I think, an easy team to figure out. And I think that was the thing that
yes,
about them that,
and
if they were going to hit a ton of threes or something, that was pretty much their only chance.
the other thing that's worth mentioning about them from a profile perspective is they were just apocalyptically bad as a rebounding team,
Oh,
which
yes.
was not the MO for a lot of Fran's tenure. He had some really good rebounding teams. They were number 316 on the offensive side, number 299 defensively. That's for a Big Ten team, that is as bad as you will ever see.
That's like you're trying not to rebound.
Right. You're running away from missed shots. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, with Fran, this was a year with, I think now looking back on the year, because I thought at least halfway through the Big Ten season that it looked like that's why I thought he was going to retire. I was pretty convinced of that. And then, he was forced out, right? But I think he
Yeah.
knew he was going to get canned. And I think, this is somewhat of a credit to the Iowa's athletic department because I think he did have to get fired. I'm not usually a fan of people getting fired just in general. But to your point, I mean, it did not look like there's any chance of this team program getting a lot better, turning a corner. There weren't any great recruits in the
Yeah.
pipeline, although does how much that matters now, I don't know. But there was just no reason. There's no reason for optimism, and all this program is going to do is maybe move sideways. If you're lucky, maybe a bump, tiny bit better, but they're not going to really be competitive again. And to make the change was, I think was a bold move because I don't think the fans are clamoring for it this year, but it was the right move, and I think they got and they I agree with you. I think they got the right coach. I mean, whether it works
Well,
out or not, we'll see. But I do think that somehow had been worked out ahead of time, and I think somehow both those guys knew about it. So maybe
well,
Fran didn't know
that's
who,
the
but
other, the McCollum angle is, and we'll talk a lot more about this months from now
yeah,
when we get into previews, but that's the really important part because when you say that they actually deserve credit for firing him, I would agree with that in this sense. Iowa is not a job that's going to automatically attract the top line sort of
right.
guys, right? It's not a place you can't win at, but it's a place that comes with some challenges. We've talked about this. Where does it sit in the firmament of Iowa athletics? It's debate. Whereas everywhere else in the Big Ten, almost everywhere else, it's a firm number two, and some places arguably number one, a couple
Hmm.
places, but it's at least number two. But Iowa number
It's three.
three in a best case.
Oh, I think it's three. I don't think it's
Yeah,
not fourth,
yeah. Well,
but
but
it's
there
third
but there was a year where you could argue Iowa women's basketball made it four.
for sure. In fact, it was
But
fourth for
generally
2 years.
speaking,
But
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And so given all of that, you've got a guy who is a hot name, who is from Iowa, was born in Iowa City.
yeah.
You're you're probably rarely going to be in a position to get a guy with the upside. Now, there's no guarantees with any of it, but we
Hmm.
were talking about McCollum what in January for that
Yes.
job. I know we were talking about it.
Yep.
It it felt like, and if this was the case, credit to them that they looked at it and said, we will not have another chance to get a guy with this kind of potential who
Hmm.
fits what this job needs better than
Yeah.
most anybody else you would ever land. And as a native, he'll take the job most likely.
Hmm.
And that ended up being the case. And so credit to them for making that move. I just didn't think at the end of the day that they would have the courage to do it.
Yeah. That's reasonable to think. And I think, for them too, I mean, I think it seems clear to me that Ben McCollum, it's a dream job. And this you can't say about every coach. He's going to walk in that he walked in those doors. He immediately understood the atmosphere. He understands the rivalries. He understands who Iowa is. And a lot of times you hire coaches, no, shade against them. It's just sometimes they just don't understand sort of how people think. It's what they're like and stuff. Like Jonathan Smith coming in as a football coach at Michigan State, he has to learn the culture. He has to learn about the rivalries. He has to learn about all this stuff, and you can tell people that, but until they actually like experience it, kind of sort of in the sort of milieu of living in there, they don't really understand it. But this Ben McCollum, he's going to walk in. He knows exactly what what's going
Yep.
on and the history of
Hit the
everything,
ground
and
running. Yep.
yeah, he knows. So that'll be helpful to them. All right, so we'll move on to the new Big Ten team, USC Trojans. They finished 17-18 overall, also 7-13. Their Ken Palm was 57th. First year coach also for Eric Musselman with a pretty much brand new team that he brought in. Notable players: Desmond Claude, Wesley Yates. They managed to beat Michigan State when Michigan State visited, which we had the opportunity to watch in person.
Yeah.
And I think if there's one thing I learned on our trip, I guess maybe I didn't learn it, but it sort of solidified my opinion of USC basketball is that no one cares. That
Yep.
it's that there's not many fans. I mean, I remember how many fans we see just walking around that were commenting like they couldn't believe all the Michigan State fans. They felt
Yes.
like they were at a road game, and I don't think they were saying it like in a mean way. They're just kind of like just truly shocked that they've never
Yeah.
they've
Well,
not
they
seen
don't,
that,
but we also saw that reaction from UCLA fans, which
but not as
there's
much.
more of a care factor there.
Yeah,
But
right.
yeah, I mean, it was really impressive. But you're right. I mean, it's obvious. USC is a football school. They've always been a football school. And basketball has always been a distant second fiddle.
Yeah.
It still is. That's why sometimes you look at guys and the decisions they make. I understand Eric Musselman was it felt like he was in a get out ahead of time before the posse situation
Exactly.
at
Yeah.
Arkansas. But it's like USC is a tough gig. Like guys have won there. They've had the occasional coach, Tim Floyd, his predecessor Andy Enfeld, who have had moments. They might have had an individual season here and there where it's worked, but it's been almost impossible to string together consistent success.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to understand it because when you sit in Los Angeles, you have access to all the time. I'm talking about the history, not so much now where it's wide open due to the portal,
Yeah,
but
sure.
you're in Southern California. And here's the thing: USC in the last 20 years has not been short of individual talent. They've actually had
No,
a
and it's,
lot.
nice weather. It's got
And
nice
but they've had a
campus.
lot
Yeah.
of they've had a lot of guys go to the NBA. They've had some of that. They just haven't put it together with consistent results team wise. You mentioned we saw Michigan State loss, so it was a Michigan State loss rather. It's pretty remarkable that a team that only loses 3 regular season games in the league, and they took one of them to USC.
We saw both of them.
Well, yeah, we saw 2 of the 3, but UCLA was not embarrassing at all.
No, no.
The USC game was embarrassing. It's probably a stretch, but no way on earth should it have happened. That took Michigan State coming out and really playing a subpar game for
Yeah.
that to happen. USC was not great that day. It was just Michigan State wasn't very good.
Hmm.
Um, Over the course of the season, they were another team that closed miserably, lost 6 of their last 7. Um, they did play in the postseason. I don't even know. Was this the NIT or something else? They beat Tulane, then they lost to Villanova, so they were two
Was
and
that
out.
the whatever the
A
invitational thing?
CBI, I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Um, but yeah, just kind of a number 41 on offense, which is kind of remarkable considering they didn't have a true point guard. Number 88 on defense. That was really where the problem was, I think.
Yeah.
They didn't guard well enough. Sure didn't see that as a problem against Michigan State. Their positional size gave MSU all kinds of problems, but over the course of the season, that was an issue. They did have some individual success. We mentioned Desmond Claude, who was really good against MSU, and he was really good on the season.
Yeah.
15.8 points, 3.5 rebounds, 4.2 assists, 48% overall, only 31% from three, but 76% at the line. And he really was able to use his size at 6'6" as a perimeter player to create a lot of such advantageous situations for himself. And then Wesley Yates, who was a freshman, had redshirted due to injury the year prior at Washington, transferred to play for Musselman, 14.1 points a game, 47.8% overall, 43.9% from three, and 80% at the line. A really good year.
Yeah.
And you know what he did?
He
Decided to
left.
transfer back to Washington. That's where he'll be next year. But he was really good for USC and he's a guy who kind of similar, not at quite the same level, but roughly similar to the season Jace Richardson had. Yates got better as time went on, and he was really playing his best basketball toward the end of the season. He leaned into it as the year went along.
Yeah, I wonder on some level too with USC. Obviously, USC did not make the decision to join the Big Ten with basketball in mind. It's all obviously all football and revenue and stuff, but
Yeah.
a team like a place like USC with the sort of the basketball tradition, we'll call it, or lack thereof, it 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 would be a lot easier in a league like the Pac-12 in order to pick up some wins to make enough of a splash to get the NCAA tournament. It's gonna be a lot harder in the Big Ten. I'm not saying they won't be able to, but it's gonna be a lot
Well,
harder for them
I
to make
think
it in, I
that
think.
I think that for with Oregon and UCLA, there's enough reason to believe, including the way they played their first year, that they can find their way to being competitive in this conference. I think with USC and especially with Washington, it's very much an open question. Are
Yeah.
those athletic departments willing to do the things you need to do to be competitive annually in a league the caliber of the Big Ten? You're absolutely right. I mean, it's a small thing, but it's going back to the Michigan State experience there. those LA schools, it was, we heard it. We would hear their fans talking about it. They had never seen anything like it. And you know what? Michigan State is not the only fan base.
Right.
I suspect, and I think Purdue goes there next year,
Hmm.
just to
Probably Illinois
California. 'Cause I
too.
think they were in Oregon and Washington this year. What's that going to look like? Probably pretty similar.
Yep.
If Indiana gives their fans any reason at all to care, similar.
Yep.
Illinois, they'll be
Hmm.
down there next year, similar. That's just an example, and it's only one example of many as to what the difference is. Um, if between the environment they were in and the environment they are in, and I think UCLA and Oregon can probably weather that. I don't think USC and Washington are as much of an automatic.
Yeah, I agree. And I could speak just from, from my experience at the Big Ten tournament in Indianapolis. I don't believe I saw any non-family members who are USC fans there. I
It's a
mean, maybe they're,
long trip.
it is, but
But I'm saying for that program,
yeah,
without that level of enthusiasm, that's a long way to go.
well, for sure. But they, their first time or whatever. So, all right, let's move on to the Northwestern Wildcats. 17-16 overall. Guess what? 7-13 in the Big Ten. They were 44th overall in Ken Palm. Notable players: Nick Martinelli, Brooks Barnheiser. Chris Collins is now at the point where I think he's safely going to be coach as long as he wants to be coach at Northwestern, barring some, I think, disaster. And I think he's good enough of a coach. Like, you can give him about any team and he's going to make him, at least tough to knock out. I think he's that talented enough as a coach. Whether he's, able to do all the other things that you need to be competitive in the Big Ten consistently is another thing. But this is a team that had a injury to Brooks Barnheiser that I think really prevented them from maybe making the Big Ten or making the NCAA tournament and to be real competitive later in the season. And that was, I think, what might have been their undoing. And this is just, I think, a reflection of Northwestern. There's that they may have the players, but they have no depth, right? They tend to be pretty thin. And so that's, they get one or two injuries, especially key injuries. I mean, any team that's obviously can hurt you, but especially more so at Northwestern.
Yeah, look, Barnheiser was injured after the 17th game.
Hmm.
And realistically, when that happened, it was over,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Their hopes of being a tournament team. But to their credit, they remained competitive. They won three of their last five. They won a game in the Big Ten Conference tournament and pushed Wisconsin in their second game before losing. So hardly a bad year given the hand that they were dealt.
Yeah.
Um, Still a really good defensive team. They were 37th. Offense suffered without Barnheiser, without Leach. They ended up 65th. It was too much at a certain point, you know. But I think that was the whole story, honestly. And that's a program that had been to what, two straight tournaments, right? And
Yeah.
saw that streak snapped. But, you couldn't, let's put it this way. That was as good an excuse for that as you're ever going to find
Yeah.
because they just that was such a you're talking about your second leading scorer who averaged 17 points, 8.8 rebounds per game and 4.2 assists in Barnheiser
Hmm. Yep.
gets hurt after 17, and then Leach, your third leading scorer, gets hurt after 23 games. So it was just at a certain point, it became about Nick Martinelli carrying them, and he had a great year. 20.5 points, 6.2 rebounds, 1.7 assists per game, 47.1% overall, 33% from three. I think the 3-point numbers went down a bit as he, started to become the only guy people targeted. Uh, Ty Berry, KJ Wyndham kind of tried to help pick it up, but it was just too much to overcome. But I was impressed with the competitiveness that they played with as the season went along, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
That they didn't allow themselves to just roll over and die after after Barnheiser went down because a lot of teams would have.
Yeah. No, I think that was the most impressive thing I think by Collins. And, we see all the talk. I thought it was funny because I was on the Iowa board after, I think it was after Fran had been fired, because just kind of wait in that waiting period, waiting for the NCAA tournament to complete for Drake. And anyway, there are a lot of people on that board who were talking about Chris Collins as being the next coach at Iowa. I feel like whenever people start talking about who the next coach to replace Izzo is, it's Chris Collins. And my impression is I mean, maybe he'd take a job like that. I don't know, but he seems very comfortable where he is. And maybe we've talked about this a number of times. I think that's kind of where he's going to stay and where he's going to finish his career. But, I suppose we could be wrong.
It kind of feels that way. I mean, at this point, it feels like there's a fit there. I mean, you do hear some interesting stuff from time to time about, I did start to hear some stuff. I think it was earlier this year about supposedly he's kind of a tough guy to work with in the AD, that he demands a lot. And at a place like Northwestern, I could see where that might be problematic. But boy, he's been there a long time now already, and he's had success that nobody else in the history of that school can match.
Right.
Really says something. And I think that at this point, you would have to be kind of a little bit surprised to see him move. It's like, well, what would compel him to move? What kind of job would be, because he's not getting the Duke job. So
No.
where else is he going to go? I mean, and the thing is, the longer this goes, of course, not that he's old, but the older he gets. I mean, he's solidly, I can't recall how old he is. He's solidly into his, well, into his
50s.
40s. No, not quite 50s. I don't think. But he's into I think he's in his mid to late 40s. And so, that starts to become a factor too.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm with you. I think he's kind of in Evanston. That just sort of feels like where it's gonna land at this point for him. The only thing that could change that is if somehow he just had a crazy breakout year where they were truly great, and then somebody decided to throw a big bag at him. But I just don't think any of that scenario is very likely.
I mean, there's always a possibility, certainly with his history of his dad, right, of NBA, coaching there.
Doesn't feel possibly like it,
but
maybe.
Yeah, I'm the
you're
same
right.
way.
You can't rule it out, but doesn't feel like it to me.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like the kind of guy.
And I also
coaching
think
job
that
somewhere.
I also think that there's some reason to think, and this tends to ebb and flow over time, but right now does not seem to me to be a period where NBA teams are clamoring to hire college guys.
Yeah.
That when you look at new hires in the NBA like last year, it's guys that are retreads or NBA assistants. There is not much clamoring for college guys.
Yeah. All right. So make sure if you need Spartan apparel, you go to our sponsor that provides all our gifts with our contest, Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. They have the widest selection of Michigan State gear. You can get whether it's men's or women's. They've got, now it's summer. It's time to new wardrobe. You got to get some t-shirts and things like that. You'd certainly get all that sort of stuff at Nudge Printing. Not only can Michigan State stuff, but you can also get other apparel either from other schools or even stuff from the Final Fours on the schedule. You can head on over to nudgeprinting.com/TFFINOTS. There you can get t-shirts, hoodies, whatever you might want that have our really cool logo on it. You can get 20% off of your order of anything at Nudge Printing by just typing in Final Four into the coupon code at the checkout. Also, the prizes for our contests. Mike Huntoon actually was in second place in both contests, if you can believe that. So he was second in the bracket pick, and he was second in predicting the Beat Rod contest for the prediction for the Big Ten tournament or Big Ten final standings. So shout out to Mike, who was sort of the second best, but and then Andrew Kurtz, who of course was the protect the logo on the and won the $100 for Nudge Printing. So get a couple good shirts and stuff out of that. So head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com to get some great stuff. So overall, I think, when you're looking at these are the dregs of the Big Ten, and I don't see any of these teams and think like, oh, well, they're going to be a lot better next year. I do think that's partly just the era we're in as far as the way that, the money, I suppose, or the transfer portal and those things go. It's going to be a tough slog for a lot of these programs. I guess the one thing I would say that and you've mentioned this before, I think maybe Iowa will move out of this bottom third just because I think their coach will maybe pull something together, and they're going to have a point guard who is very good, and that might be enough to sort of win you a couple more games to get you at least into the middle of the Big Ten. But the other rest of the programs, I'm not quite so confident about.
Yeah, I think that I think that it's hard. It's just so hard in this current environment to know. Like we had some surprises last year, both directions, and I think that will continue.
Sure.
I am pretty confident that Iowa is going to be better. How much better, what that equates to, that remains to be seen. But I do think they're going to be better. And I say that the short term and the longer term. I believe that. I think McCollum's really good. And I think he's going to make them a pain in a way that they weren't consistently under Fran. There were
Right.
individual seasons here and there, but I think it's going to be pretty regular. Beyond that, out of this group of teams, Chris Collins has done enough at Northwestern that you certainly
That's
can't
true.
rule out. You know, the other guys, I do still think Mike Rhodes has a shot, but he's got to do it. Fred
Yeah.
Hoiberg, boy, the way they
It feels like the
close,
momentum's the wrong direction, doesn't it? It really
yeah.
does. Maybe
Just
that's
when
not
you think
fair.
he's finally found it,
Yeah.
yeah. So we've got that. Washington at USC, Musselman's always going to have talent, and they've got talent. They're going to have talent this year, but how does it all mesh? I don't know.
Yeah.
The one team out of that group that I right now I would view with some skepticism, even though they're getting Yates back, is Washington.
Yeah. Right.
I
Absolutely.
just I'm going to have to see it to believe that they can move out of this pack.
Yeah. And so now the one thing I will say is that if you look at the SEC last year, now I don't expect this from the Big Ten. 14 of their 16 teams made the NCAA tournament, so it's not impossible to imagine that you could have 14 Big Ten teams make it. But there's going to be, but maybe with
Well,
this the spend of some.
what's got to happen, there was probably the right kind of mix in terms of parity within the Big Ten to do that this year
Yeah.
if those teams had done a better job in the non-conference. So, for
Exactly.
example, USC had no shot. They and Nebraska both were 7-13 in the league. They both had poor ends to their season, but one of them was in great shape and frittered it away. The other one didn't have a good shot even before they went on that losing skid. And it was all down to the non-conference performance. That's where, as a program and as a league, you set yourself up for that kind of season is if you have a truly great non-conference. So that's where it's got to start for the Big Ten to have that kind of year.
Yeah. Yeah. And those games that you don't even know are happening, or like the upset of someone to you see Santa Clara or something like that, can really affect the entire league, obviously, and the whole league
Sure.
standings. And so,
Yeah.
you might get a big win, big profile win against Kansas, but if you have a couple losses to some sub 250 teams that from other teams in your league, it might cancel it out because it's all together in some respects, right? It's a league versus just a single team. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
all right. Well, I think we'll end it there. We'll be back next week with our middle of the pack Big Ten preview, or postseason. Sorry. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.